Tywin Lannister's breath rasped through the stillness of his solar in Casterly Rock. The once indomitable Lord of the West laid low by an affliction that gnawed at him like a vulture upon a dying beast. The hush of the marble corridors outside, the distant crash of waves against the rocky crag, seemed to underscore his weakness in a mocking manner. A man of near-mythic reputation, Tywin was known as unyielding, brilliant, and possessed of a fierce control that had forged the Lannister name into gold. But now that gold threatened to tarnish. Though only a handful within the castle walls knew of his dire condition, the threat was ever present. If House Lannister's enemies caught the faintest scent of his failing health, they would swoop in to devour the spoils. Cersei Lannister stood by her father's bedside that evening, shoulders drawn tight with tension. She was resplendent in her own right, golden hair twisted into an elegant coil, but in her eyes a war raged. None among her father's children knew how to navigate the game of power as fluidly, or so she believed, yet the sickness that plagued Tywin left her heart hammering with dread. Lord Tywin had taught her the value of unwavering strength and the perils of showing weakness. Now, she stared down at his gray face and saw, for the first time in her life, a man who might slip away into the clutches of mortality. The fear that it sparked in her was not solely for him, but for the security of House Lannister, for the name that she and her brothers carried. He coughed, and the sound reverberated through Cersei's every nerve. "Fetch Maester Crelin," he croaked, "and do not call attention to this matter." His voice was still sharp, still the command of a mighty man, but it was interwoven with threads of a frailty that terrified her. She nodded and spun on her heel, not letting him see the concern etched on her face. Only once she was outside his door did she allow her composure to crumble, if only for a heartbeat. A pair of Lannister guards stood at the ready. She donned a mask of confidence, instructing the nearest guard to fetch the maester discreetly. That guard disappeared, footsteps echoing down the hall. Within the hour, Maester Crelin arrived, an elderly man with stooped shoulders and keen, thoughtful eyes. He was attended by a pair of silent novices in gray robes, but Cersei dismissed them with a curt wave of her hand. She refused to let rumor blossom in these halls. She recalled all too well the way the realm feasted on perceived weakness, how quickly political predators would move. The novices withdrew, leaving Maester Crelin alone with Cersei outside Lord Tywin's chamber. "Do you know what ails him?" Cersei demanded in a hushed voice. "He was robust a fortnight ago. This came upon him so suddenly." The maester's expression was inscrutable. "It may be an infection in his lungs or perhaps something deeper," he said quietly, "but I have my suspicions. Lord Tywin has been pressing himself too relentlessly. Stress can do strange things to even the greatest of men. I'll hear no talk of him failing," she snapped too sharply. Then, with effort, she tempered her tone. "He will recover. Do you understand?" Maester Crelin inclined his head. "I will do all I can, my lady. But you must be prepared." He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably beneath her piercing gaze. "Shall we see him now?" They stepped into the solar. Tywin lay in a large bed draped with crimson and gold hangings, the sigil of House Lannister, a proud golden lion, glinting from an ornate tapestry behind him. Every candle cast a flicker upon his face. Cersei watched as the maester approached with a steady composure, checking the lord's temperature, examining his chest, and listening to the rattle of each breath. When Tywin would not or could not speak, he merely gestured impatiently as though the very act of being prodded were intolerable. Eventually, Maester Crelin pressed a palm to Tywin's forehead. "You are feverish. I will prepare a draft to bring it down. Rest is paramount now. I must advise you to stay abed for at least a moon's turn. Perhaps two." Tywin's anger flared in his eyes. "You ask me to remain hidden from my own halls for weeks?" He coughed, struggling to maintain his usual iron composure. "If the lords of the realm suspect that I am incapacitated, it could sow chaos." Cersei watched the tension in her father's jaw. He still believed himself the keystone upon which the realm's stability hinged. In truth, with King Robert Baratheon aging and the realm stirring under the pressure of winter's eventual approach, that belief was not far from the truth. Were Tywin to appear weak, it could kindle a storm of opportunists. She had seen lesser lords destroyed by rumors alone. But the maester remained calm, almost gentle. "My lord, the decision is yours, but if you do not rest and let the fever subside, the cost may be dear. Allow me to treat you here quietly. If any ask, we might say that you are attending to matters in your private quarters. Nothing unusual for the Lord of Casterly Rock, is it?" Tywin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his gaze settled on Cersei, a silent command to guard his secrets. "So be it, but I will have no one prying into my condition. Only you and my children shall know." Cersei inclined her head. "As you say, father. Rest now, and we shall see your strength return." She stood vigil for a while longer, even after the maester completed his ministrations. Long after Tywin drifted into a restless sleep, Cersei lingered, arms folded across her chest, listening to the faint labor of his breathing. She tried to banish the echoes of fear rising in her mind. What if he truly slipped from this mortal coil? What if, with Tywin gone, the name Lannister became a ripe target? When she finally left his chamber, she summoned a guard once again. "Send word to my brothers. I want Jaime back at Casterly Rock at once," she said. "And Tyrion, if you must. He's off doing whatever he does in the far corners of the realm, but he must hear this. They are both to come discreetly, without fanfare." Though her voice carried an edge of disdain when she spoke Tyrion's name, she still recognized that the imp had a mind for cunning. And cunning was what they needed now. She could feel the winds of change swirling through the corridors. War had not yet erupted in the realm, but the tensions were there. The uneasy alliances, the suspicion that hung over the capital like a dark cloud. Cersei could sense something shifting in the bones of the realm itself. If Tywin's sickness persisted, the Lannisters might find themselves scrambling to maintain the advantage that had so long seemed inevitable under her father's guidance. 2 days later, Jaime Lannister arrived, summoned from the garrison where he had been stationed for some minor quell of bandits. He entered the courtyard with a handful of knights in red cloaks, but he dispensed with them quickly. When he made his way to the solar, armor clinking, Cersei greeted him with a curt nod, stepping forward to place a hand on his cheek. Jaime's green eyes flicked over her face, searching for answers. "How is he?" he asked. She led him inside, where he saw Tywin propped against pillows, asleep under the watch of Maester Crelin. The tension in Jaime's shoulders was unmasked in that moment, a flash of concern for the father who had so often withheld affection. Cersei could see it in him. For all his boldness and bravado, he was just as unsettled by the prospect of Tywin's mortality. After all, it was Tywin who had shaped them, who had hammered them into pawns of his own making. When they stepped back into the corridor, leaving the maester to attend the sleeping lord, Jaime turned to his twin. "What happened?" His voice was low. Father was never one to be taken by illness. Cersei relayed what little she knew, explaining the sudden onset of fever, the cough that racked Tywin's body, and the maester's bleak prognosis that only rest would bring him back to health. "He's not yet at death's door," she said, unable to keep the quiver from her voice, "but this fever isn't breaking. He's stable for now, but we must keep it hidden." Jaime's expression hardened. "Rumors already swirl when I ride from my post so suddenly. If this becomes common knowledge, the sharks will circle. The Tullys, the Baratheons, even the Tyrells. Father has never truly trusted them." Cersei nodded. "And the new Warden of the North, whoever that might be, they too might see weakness and exploit it." She hesitated, pressing her lips together. "That's why we need Tyrion. As loath as I am to admit it, the imp is cleverer than most. He can help maintain the illusion that Father is still the man he once was. He can forge the alliances, spread the right rumors, keep the wrong ones from taking root." Jaime grimaced at the mention of Tyrion, but he did not argue. "Where is he now?" "In the Vale, I believe. Traveling. Wagering away his coin, or so I heard." She sighed. "He can roam as he likes, but he will come if we summon him. One thing Tyrion has never shirked is his loyalty to our house, regardless of what Father thinks." Jaime nodded in reluctant agreement. They lingered there in the corridor for a moment, the hush of the fortress wrapping around them. No siblings, no family. Even the simple notion that Tywin might be mortal unsettled the foundations of Cersei's world. Their father had always seemed so unwavering. It felt like an admission of some cosmic error to see him laid low by a fever. In the days that followed, Cersei and Jaime guarded Tywin's privacy with relentless vigilance. If any lord inquired, the official response was that the Lord of Casterly Rock was immersed in matters of administration, that he was not to be disturbed, or that he had traveled to a distant outpost. They were not consistent with the stories, for the realm had never demanded consistency from a man as powerful as Tywin. Yet they took care to keep all visitors at bay, turning them aside with plausible reasons or shallow courtesies. So long as no one caught sight of him sweating and pale beneath the embroidered sheets, the ruse might hold. But tension coiled in Cersei's belly like a serpent. She spoke with Jaime in hushed conferences by night, pacing behind locked doors. The messages they received from King's Landing hinted that King Robert was growing restless, that Ned Stark, the newly appointed hand, was investigating matters too closely. Rumors flared that the Targaryen girl across the Narrow Sea had wed a Dothraki warlord, an event that might or might not shape events in the Seven Kingdoms. Whispers drifted of plots and alliances forming behind closed doors. And all the while, Tywin's condition remained precarious. 5 days after Jaime's arrival, Tyrion appeared. He strolled through the main gates of Casterly Rock at dusk, riding a small but sturdy horse. By his side rode Bronn, a mercenary of ambiguous repute, eyeing the crimson Lannister banners with a mixture of wariness and mild amusement. Tyrion's mismatched eyes flicked around the courtyard, taking in everything with that quicksilver intelligence. He dismounted ungracefully, earning a sympathetic chuckle from Bronn, and brushed the dust from his fine tunic. Waiting to greet him at the steps was Jaime, arms folded, with an expression that was neither warm nor unkind. Tyrion offered him a small bow. "Greetings, dear brother. Any chance this summons was actually a subtle invitation to a feast? I do miss the feasts here. So lavish and energetic." He smirked. Jaime did not return the smile. "Feasts are the last thing on anyone's mind." "Ah," Tyrion said, glancing up at the imposing facade of the rock. "So it's not a social call. Should I presume someone has died or is about to?" Jaime hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Father is ill." Tyrion's smirk vanished, replaced by genuine concern. "How ill?" "Too ill to be seen," Jaime replied. "Come inside." They ascended the wide stairs, Tyrion's footsteps echoing. The formidable interior greeted him with the same grandeur that he remembered. High vaulted ceilings, the tapestries in shades of crimson and gold, and suits of gilded armor, relics from the days when House Lannister first carved out its domain, stood silent guard. But he sensed a gloom in the halls, as though the light of day had retreated from within. A hush accompanied them, as if every servant had been told to speak softly or not at all. When they reached Tywin's chambers, the door was shut tight. Outside, 2 guards in Lannister livery stood stone-faced. Jaime knocked, then pushed open the door. Together they entered, finding Cersei seated in a chair near the bed, staring at their father's resting form. Her gaze flicked toward Tyrion, and though she did not snarl, her voice was sharp as broken glass. "You took your time." Tyrion inclined his head, refusing to be baited. "I came as soon as your summons reached me." She pursed her lips, tension evident in every line of her posture. "He sleeps much of the day. When he wakes, he demands updates, but he's weaker than I've ever seen him. The fever comes and goes in waves. For 2 days, we thought he might be past the worst of it, but tonight it seems to have returned." At the bedside, Tyrion stood on tiptoe to observe Tywin's face. Even asleep, Lord Tywin's brow was creased, as though battling foes in his dreams. Tyrion noted the dark hollows under his father's eyes, the faint sheen of sweat, the tremor in his breathing. Death had not claimed him yet, but it lurked uncomfortably near. "I suppose we're keeping this a secret?" Tyrion asked, glancing at Jaime. "Else you wouldn't have asked me to ride here with such haste." "Yes," Cersei hissed. "We are keeping it a secret, and we intend to maintain that charade for as long as necessary. Word in King's Landing is that the realm totters on the edge of upheaval. With Robert's heirs in question and the Targaryen girl in the east, who knows what alliances might shift. Father's strength has always been our greatest deterrent. If that is in question, so is our safety." Tyrion nodded, folding his hands behind his back. "Then we must ensure no whiff of this leaves the rock. That means controlling the staff, screening every messenger." He paused, his voice calmer than either sibling expected. "But that alone may not suffice. Men are suspicious by nature, and lords love gossip. If Father doesn't emerge soon, rumors will start to swirl." Cersei looked at Jaime, then back to Tyrion, her jaw set. "We can't hide him forever. But perhaps, well, he must make at least one public appearance, a brief one, to quell the rumors. If that proves impossible, we must start sowing some plausible story as to his whereabouts." Jaime grimaced, raking a hand through his golden hair. "He cannot stand without swaying. No one would believe it if we tried to put him before a crowd." Tyrion chewed on his lip thoughtfully. "Then we have 2 options. Either we double down on the narrative that father has taken to traveling for the sake of negotiations or the king's business, or we try to orchestrate a more controlled demonstration of his presence, something private and limited in attendance. A few choice lords or knights, those who can be trusted or coerced into silence, might see him upright for a moment. Then that would quell talk in a wider circle. He glanced at his siblings. But all depends on him regaining at least a measure of health. Cersei closed her eyes, exhaustion creeping over her features. I'd hoped you would have some brilliant scheme. I might, once I've seen all the pieces on the board, Tyrion said. For now, let me speak with Maester Crelin, examine the staff. Then we'll talk. We cannot force the fever to break, but we can shape the perceptions around it. She regarded him warily, but nodded. Very well. And do it discreetly. I will not have the house in disarray. In the days that followed, Tyrion set about doing precisely what he had promised. He made subtle inquiries among the servants, learning which of them had access to Tywin's chambers. He found that Maester Crelin was competent, though neither miracle worker nor fool. Tyrion also discovered that a handful of the staff suspected something was amiss, though no one dared speak the truth aloud. Whispers were the currency of the castle, and Tyrion traded in them like a master. While Tyrion busied himself with these tasks, Jaime oversaw security, tightening patrols around the rock. He wanted no prying eyes from beyond the Westerlands to slip inside unnoticed. Meanwhile, Cersei corresponded with King's Landing, forging letters in Tywin's name when needed, slipping in plausible details to maintain the illusion that Lord Tywin remained as engaged and formidable as ever. But it was a precarious dance. The war that had yet to erupt in full threatened to break forth at any moment. The realm was simmering, and the Lannisters knew that any sign of vulnerability might be enough to tip the scales against them. Every evening, they would gather to discuss the day's developments, speaking in hushed tones behind a locked door. Each passing dawn, they hoped to see Tywin's fever abate, but it clung like a jealous lover. For a day or two, it would recede, and Tywin's eyes would open with their old clarity, yet he remained too weak to rise from bed. Then, without warning, the fever would surge again, leaving him trembling and pale. It weighed on them all. Even Jaime, normally so quick to jape, wore a constant furrow in his brow. Cersei's temper flared at the slightest provocation. And Tyrion, though he strove for levity in conversation, was uncharacteristically subdued when alone. The three siblings found themselves in a forced unity, bound by the secret that threatened to undo their house. Thus were the foundations laid for the grand deception. A veneer of continuity, a facade that Tywin Lannister stood as implacable as ever, even as his body waged a war with itself. And beyond the stone walls of Casterly Rock, the Seven Kingdoms stirred. Robert Baratheon's court turned fractious. The lords of the north, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the Reach angled for advantage. Unbeknownst to the Lannisters, the War of the Five Kings was coiling like a serpent, ready to strike. But in this alternate path, Tywin Lannister teetered on the precipice of life and death before that war could even begin in earnest. How long could they sustain this ruse? How long could the fearsome lion remain hidden in the shadows? The first real test of their carefully guarded secret came a week after Tyrion's arrival, when a contingent from the Reach appeared on the horizon. A small party of riders, banners depicting the golden rose of House Tyrell, rode up the rocky road to Casterly Rock. Leading them was Ser Loras Tyrell himself, accompanied by a handful of knights. Word traveled fast that the Knight of Flowers had come bearing a polite request for an audience with Lord Tywin regarding certain tariffs and trade agreements. Cersei seethed at the timing, convinced that the Tyrells must have sniffed out some hint of weakness. Jaime suspected otherwise, that it might simply be part of the Tyrells' grandstanding, a means to keep the Lannisters on their toes. Tyrion, however, saw opportunity as well as peril. If they could spin this encounter in their favor, it might serve as proof that Tywin Lannister remained steadfast. But how to pull it off without exposing the truth? Even standing for a short while seemed beyond Tywin's present strength. They consulted behind closed doors, voices growing heated. Cersei insisted that Tywin could simply refuse them, claiming pressing matters or a prior commitment. Tyrion countered that a direct refusal could appear as insult or weakness. Jaime, arms crossed, listened to both arguments. We could have him sit, Jaime's, aid, almost timidly, as if the notion alone were painful. Dress him in his finest, seat him in the solar. Let Ser Loras see him there, perhaps only for a few minutes. We keep the room dim, blame a headache for the subdued lighting. As soon as the meeting is done, escort the Tyrells out. Cersei frowned. Father would never agree to appear less than his best. He might have no choice, Tyrion pointed out. If Father were in full command, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. We must manage him as we would a king in decline. When that happens, the council props him up, quite literally if needed. So be it. We do this behind the scenes. No one but we siblings, and perhaps Maester Crelin, can be allowed in the solar. But Loras Tyrell is no fool, said Cersei. He'll see the truth if Father is half lucid or trembling. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Then we must ensure he sees only what we want him to see. Father will be dressed and composed. He'll speak briefly, perhaps only a handful of sentences, enough to convey command. Then we politely shorten the meeting, or better yet, have Father feign anger or impatience. That is well within his usual character, wouldn't you say? Jaime's tense grimace softened into agreement. Yes, that might do. Let Tywin rage at them for daring to come unannounced. That would hide his weakened state behind fury. It's a performance, but one they'll expect from him. Cersei hesitated, recalling how Tywin demanded absolute control. She could not imagine him consenting to be managed like a puppet. But she also knew the alternative was letting suspicion take root. We'll speak to him, she concluded at length. As it turned out, persuading Tywin proved even more daunting than they feared. When they approached him that evening, the fever had ebbed a little, giving him a window of greater clarity. The Lord of Casterly Rock greeted them with thinly veiled disdain at their suggestion. I will not be paraded about like some puppet, he wheezed, though his eyes flashed with anger. His once imposing voice was reduced to something raspier, yet the weight of his authority was undiminished in tone. If I cannot stand, I cannot stand. Let them go to the 7 hells. Cersei's heart pounded. Father, with respect, we cannot afford an open slight to the Tyrells. Then you handle it, he said dismissively. Tell Ser Loras I'm away or that I'm ill. He caught himself, realizing the slip. No, not ill. Engaged elsewhere. Father, Jaime said quietly, we fear that rumors may already be stirring. A single audience, brief and decisive, could quell them. Tywin's eyes flicked from Jaime to Tyrion and back again. A sneer touched his lips. I see you've arrived at a plan, then. Tyrion took a step closer. He had to tilt his head up to address Tywin, even though the man lay propped on pillows. We propose a brief meeting in your solar. You needn't stand for more than a minute. You can dismiss Ser Loras as soon as he's seen that you remain in command. Show your anger if you like. Anger is a potent mask for weakness. Tywin's jaw worked as if chewing the idea. His pride rebelled at the notion, but he recognized the necessity of it. You will help me dress, he said at last, his tone grudging. And you will ensure that I do not falter in front of that pretty, preening peacock. Jaime released a breath of relief. Cersei merely nodded, relief warring with the dread of witnessing her father so diminished. Tyrion placed a hand on the bed frame. Of course. If you feel unsteady, blame them for coming at an inconvenient time. Rant about your own schedule, how you despise being interrupted. That's entirely within your character, father, if I may say so. Tywin scowled. You may not, but I acknowledge the truth in it. So it was decided. Early the next morning, while the Tyrell party waited in a receiving hall under polite guard, Tyrion and Jaime helped Tywin dress in a rich doublet of crimson velvet, the golden lion sigil stitched across the breast. Cersei arranged the solar. She had servants bring in fresh rushes and roses. None of them were permitted to linger, and Cersei oversaw them personally, ensuring they remained unaware of Tywin's weakened state. She kept the curtains partially drawn, dimming the light just enough to blur the lines of Tywin's exhaustion without making it obvious. She placed a single high-backed chair near the hearth with a smaller seat for Ser Loras, ensuring a vantage that would force him to look up to Tywin rather than the other way around. When all was ready, Jaime and Tyrion escorted their father from his bedchamber. Each son lent him a discreet hand, allowing Tywin to lean on them as necessary. Step by step he moved, stiff but resolute, refusing to let them see how much effort each pace cost him. They paused at the threshold of the solar. The Lord of the Rock forced his shoulders back, exhaling slowly as if steeling himself for battle. "Show them in," Tywin commanded in a low voice. Jaime nodded and signaled a guard to bring Ser Loras. Cersei stood at Tywin's side like a sentinel, her expression unreadable. When Ser Loras Tyrell entered, the Knight of Flowers was resplendent in shining armor chased with gold filigree, his polished hair framing a face that might have been carved from marble. He bowed low. His pale green eyes flicked over Tywin, taking in the older man's proud bearing. Perhaps he noticed the slight pallor in Tywin's cheeks or the faint sheen of perspiration, but if so, he gave no sign of it. "My lord," Loras said, straightening, "I bring greetings from Hydarden and from my lord father, Mace Tyrell. We wish to discuss the renewal of certain trade agreements and your stance on the grain tariffs for the coming season." Tywin's gaze felt like a sword's edge, even in illness. He did not sit. Instead, he stood, his hands clasped behind his back, though Cersei could see the tension in his stance. "You come unannounced, Ser Loras," he said in a clipped tone, voice low and cold. "Have you so little regard for my time?" Loras, though renowned for his courtesy, stiffened. "Forgive me, Lord Tywin, but our missives went unanswered. We were uncertain whether you had received them. Perhaps I have more pressing concerns than responding to every rose that blooms in the Reach," Tywin retorted, letting his old scorn drip like acid. Behind him, Tyrion stifled a faint smile. The old lion still has claws, he thought. Loras bowed his head slightly, his cheeks coloring. "We meant no offense. If your lordship is otherwise occupied, we can discuss these matters with Lady Cersei or Lord Tyrion." Tywin's lip curled. "I am the Lord of Casterly Rock, and I decide what matters I attend to. You will speak, and I will hear you for precisely as long as I choose." Jaime watched from the side, heart pounding, fearing any moment that Tywin might falter. But the older man drew on a reservoir of willpower, projecting that legendary aura of command. Ser Loras, under Tywin's scrutiny, shifted, uncertain. Loras launched into his prepared speech about trade pacts and the importance of forging stronger bonds between the Lannisters and the Tyrells. Tywin listened, or appeared to. After a few minutes, Tywin cut him off with a dismissive gesture. "Send your terms by Raven. I have no intention of wasting my morning haggling over trivialities. If your father desires an alliance, he knows the proper channels. If he wants to discuss these matters in detail, he may come himself." The curt response left Loras blinking. For all his knightly grace, he was unaccustomed to such blatant rudeness. But Tywin Lannister had built his reputation on blunt, hard truths. The Knight of Flowers swallowed. "I will relay your words to Lord Mace. Thank you for your time, my lord." Tywin's head jerked in a slight nod. "Do so promptly. The next time you decide to ride to my gates, pray that you bring me something more substantial than idle talk of tariffs." His gaze slid past Loras, fixing on Jaime. "Escort our guest out." Jaime bowed. "Yes, father." With that, he stepped forward, guiding Ser Loras toward the door. The young knight glanced back, concern flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing further. He left the solar, boots tapping against the stone floor. Cersei waited until the door closed, then turned quickly to Tywin, fear twisting her features. "Father, you should sit," he waved her off, but it was clear the effort had taken its toll. His breathing was ragged, his face pale. Tyrion hurried to his side, offering a steadying arm. The old lion all but collapsed into the high-back chair. For a moment, he closed his eyes, his jaw clenched in silent fury at his own frailty. "Did it suffice?" he asked, voice trembling only slightly. Cersei nodded, exhaling. "Yes. Ser Loras will report that you are in no mood for trivialities. No one will suspect you are too weak to stand." Tywin let out a slow breath. "Then we have bought ourselves a reprieve. For now." In truth, it was more than a mere reprieve. Word soon spread through the small retinue of Tyrell knights that Tywin Lannister remained as formidable as ever, if anything, more irascible than usual. Gossip being what it was, the story took on a life of its own, painting a picture of a still-feared lion, snapping and snarling at any who dared disturb him. The siblings allowed that rumor to flourish, for it served their purpose well. Yet within the castle, day after day, Tywin's body continued to fight the fever. Maester Craylin's potions and poultices helped in small measures, but there was no miraculous recovery. Some days Tywin seemed on the cusp of improvement, managing to sit upright and speak with near clarity. Then he would be stricken again, coughing, sweating, his strength drained. The seasons shifted. A sense of foreboding clung to the west, as news of tensions elsewhere in the realm trickled in. Riverrun bristled under the watchful eye of the Tullis, whispering about King Robert's dealings in the capital. The Starks in the north, ever watchful, had eyes turned south, and rumors of troubles on the King's Road were rising. Amid all these uncertainties, Tyrion convened increasingly private meetings with Cersei and Jaime, brainstorming ways to maintain their father's iron grip without letting the rest of Westeros know that it was slipping from his physical hands. Jaime urged they take a stronger stance in certain border disputes to reinforce the perception of Tywin's power. Cersei advocated sending envoys to King's Landing with lavish gifts in Tywin's name to soothe any speculation. Tyrion, for his part, played the game of whispers with cunning, ensuring that key household staff were well bribed or intimidated into silence. No ravens left Casterly Rock carrying tales of a bedridden Tywin. No traveling minstrels were allowed within the fortress's heart. Even the local small folk noticed the unusual hush, but when asked, the guards would say only that the Lord was busy with pressing matters of state. That explanation satisfied most, for who dared question the ways of House Lannister? All the while, Tywin seethed in his bed, furious at his own body's betrayal. From time to time, he demanded updates on the realm's affairs, summoning enough vigor to probe, strategize, and command. His mind remained as sharp as Valyrian steel, if only his body would obey. He chafed at the notion of relying on others, especially Tyrion, the son he had long derided. Yet even Tywin could not deny that Tyrion's cunning was proving invaluable. House Lannister had not collapsed, not even staggered, under the weight of this secret. It was inevitable, however, that more tests would come. The next arrived from the Riverlands in the form of an urgent plea. Riverrun had endured border skirmishes with raiders, men rumored to be under the banner of the mountain that rides Gregor Clegane, who was known to be loyal to the Lannisters. This at least was the rumor. In truth, Gregor had not been ordered by Tywin to raid anything, not in his current state. But the mountain was a volatile beast, rarely leashed, and there were old grudges between him and some lesser lords sworn to House Tully. The official letter from Lord Hoster Tully arrived by Raven, accusing Tywin of unleashing Clegane on Tully lands, demanding recompense. It reeked of challenge and threat, reminding House Lannister that the Tullys had allies. This letter came to Cersei's hand first, and she read it with mounting anger. They dare accuse us of sending that brute across the border? Cersei spat, showing the parchment to Jaime and Tyrion. When father recovers, he will have Gregor's hide, perhaps, Tyrion said mildly, or perhaps father would have encouraged Gregor's raids under normal circumstances. Let us not forget how father used him in the past to sow fear. But whether or not we condone it now, the Tullys believe it. Jaime cursed under his breath. We can't remain silent. The Tullys might rally the Riverlands, and that would be one step away from the Starks or the Baratheons joining them. If there's a chance that Gregor is truly out there rampaging without orders, we need to rein him in before this escalates. Cersei's eyes shone with fury. We can't appear weak. If father were well, he might send a strong message back to Riverrun, stating that their lord had best mind his tongue. But in his absence, in his illness, you mean? Tyrion interjected. We must respond as father would, or as close to it as we can manage. Perhaps we send a letter in father's name condemning the raids while also refusing any blame. We promise to investigate and punish any outlaws wearing our banner. That might placate them or at least stall them. Cersei snorted. You think the Tullys will be satisfied by words? Not forever, no, said Tyrion. But we need time. Jaime rapped his knuckles on the table. If Gregor is truly out there rampaging, we should recall him. He won't listen to me or to any of us unless he believes it's Tywin's order. But perhaps a sealed command bearing father's own hand. He fears father. They exchanged glances. Tywin was too weak to pen a letter himself, but perhaps he could scrawl a signature. Tyrion stroked the stubble on his chin. That might work. We can craft a letter in father's name instructing Gregor to cease any raids and return to the Westerlands. Then we can follow up with the Tullys stating that we have taken measures. And if Gregor refuses to comply? Cersei asked. Then we face an even greater problem, Tyrion acknowledged. But we cannot ignore the Tully letter. We must at least appear to address the issue. So it was decided. Tyrion wrote out a carefully worded missive, forging Tywin's voice to perfection, commanding the mountain to cease his unauthorized aggression and return at once. Then he and Jaime carried the letter to Tywin. The old lord, half propped on pillows, managed to read it with lips pressed thin. With a trembling hand, he scratched a crude version of his signature at the bottom. The scrawl lacked the usual precision, but it bore enough resemblance to pass inspection. See that it is delivered by a reliable courier, Tywin said. And in the meantime, make it clear to Riverrun that I do not take kindly to their accusations. He paused, his breathing labored. His gaze flicked to Tyrion. Your penmanship. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was mine. A reluctant admission, if ever there was one. Tyrion bowed his head slightly. I learned from the best, father. With that, the letter was dispatched. A second letter went to Lord Hoster Tully, couched in measured politeness but bristling with implied menace. By the time the ravens flew off, Cersei felt a rush of dread and triumph mingled. They had responded as Tywin would to a threat. But every new challenge chipped away at their facade, requiring more elaborate machinations to uphold the illusion of Tywin's active leadership. The precarious balance grew more fragile when a summons from King's Landing arrived. The Hand of the King, Lord Eddard Stark, requested Tywin Lannister's presence at the capital, citing the need for clarity on several pressing matters, including the situation at the borders and rumored Lannister involvement in various skirmishes. The letter made no accusation outright, but the subtext was plain: the crown demanded accountability. Cersei read it aloud in Tywin's chambers. Tyrion listened quietly, arms crossed. Jaime stood by the window, tension evident in his stance. Tywin, pale and perspiring, regarded the letter with clenched teeth. I will not be summoned like some child, he snapped, though his voice cracked mid-sentence. A fit of coughing followed, and he pressed a linen cloth to his lips until it subsided. Stark presumes too much. Cersei knew, however, that ignoring the summons could be seen as open defiance of the crown. Even in his prime, Tywin would not casually disregard such a message from the Hand. Robert Baratheon's reign might have grown lax, but Ned Stark was a man of stubborn honor. He would interpret silence as guilt, and if the crown turned its ire on the Lannisters with the king's might behind it, it could escalate swiftly. Father, Jaime ventured, we can't refuse outright. But neither can you ride to King's Landing in this condition. Tywin's glare could have melted stone. Then someone must go in my stead. You, perhaps? Or Cersei, given she is the queen's. Cersei shook her head, fire in her eyes. I will not parade myself before Ned Stark and have him pry into our affairs. I belong here, ensuring the stability of the Rock. Jaime also hesitated. It would look suspicious if I arrived alone without you, father, given that the summons was specifically for you. They might ask if you're truly in command. Tywin closed his eyes, pain etched on his lined face. When he opened them, he turned to Tyrion. The dwarf blinked in surprise, meeting his father's gaze. A question hung in the air, unspoken yet potent. You have a cunning tongue, Tywin said, voice thin. Use it. You will go to King's Landing in my name and make certain that Stark does not grow too bold. Tyrion's heart thudded. He had been to King's Landing before, but never as Tywin's proxy on matters of state. The realm was a nest of vipers, a pit of politics that demanded skill and nerve. Yet there was a part of him that rose to the challenge, spurred by the chance to prove his worth beyond doubt. As you command, father. I will leave as soon as arrangements can be made. Cersei looked as though she wanted to protest, but Tywin raised a hand. Tyrion will go. Let none question that I sent him. Should King Robert or Lord Stark demand answers, you will provide them in my name. Make it abundantly clear that House Lannister bends the knee only to the crown, not to the Hand's whims. Another wave of coughing cut him off. Jaime nodded slowly, though he did not hide his unease. Tyrion can handle himself. But what if they demand to see you, father? Will a letter suffice? It will have to, Tywin rasped once the coughing subsided. You will help me draft it. Or do it yourself, Tyrion, and I'll sign it. Make the language precise. Avoid any suggestion of submission or apology. Stark must be reminded who he's dealing with. Tyrion bowed. Very well. Preparations began at once. Tyrion set about selecting a small retinue, enough to lend an air of authority, but not so large as to provoke suspicion that Tywin was leading from behind them. Bronn would ride with him, along with a few trusted knights and servants loyal to House Lannister. Tyrion also gathered copies of relevant documents, forging or revising them as needed to maintain the illusion of Tywin's direct oversight. On the eve of his departure, Tyrion was summoned to Tywin's chamber alone. Stepping past the guards, he found his father lying in bed, a single candle casting flickering shadows across his features. For a moment, Tyrion was taken aback by how frail Tywin appeared, how the hollows around his eyes had deepened. The illusions they spun for the outside world could not mask this truth. Father, you wish to see me? Tywin lifted a hand in a gesture that might have been beckoning him closer or merely a spasm of weariness. Come, he said quietly. When Tyrion approached, Tywin fixed him with a piercing stare. I know you, Tyrion. You relish the chance to prove you're more than the imp I have named you." Tyrion felt a surge of conflicting emotions: resentment, determination, a flicker of hope for approval. "If I succeed, perhaps you'll see that I can serve our house as effectively as any other." Tywin was silent for a long moment, his breathing labored. Then he spoke, his voice reduced to a harsh whisper. "Do not mistake this for a gesture of faith. I send you because I must. You will keep that in mind." The words struck Tyrion like a blow, though he did not show it. He nodded slowly. "I understand." Tywin's eyes slid shut, exhaustion pulling at him. "Return with results, Tyrion. Keep the crown from meddling in our affairs. Placate Stark or outmaneuver him, whichever is required. If you fail—" He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. House Lannister had little tolerance for failure, and Tywin's face told Tyrion all he needed to know of what might happen if he disappointed his father once more. Tyrion inclined his head, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I will do what must be done." Then he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. That night, Casterly Rock seemed more ominous than ever, its corridors lined with secrets. He wondered if this was the last time he would see his father alive. The fever had not abated. If Tywin slipped away into the stranger's grasp, House Lannister's fate would hinge on how well Tyrion and his siblings could uphold their father's legacy. With the dawn, Tyrion departed, riding out beneath the crimson banners that snapped in the wind. Jaime and Cersei stood upon the steps, watching in silence. The morning light painted Casterly Rock in hues of gold, a reminder of the splendor House Lannister had always possessed. Tyrion looked over his shoulder one last time, an unspoken prayer on his lips that the old lion might hold on, that he might one day see Tywin Lannister stand tall again, if only to begrudge Tyrion a grudging nod of approval. As the gates closed behind him, Tyrion could not shake the weight that pressed upon his heart. The War of the Five Kings had not yet erupted, but the tensions ran deep as ever. And in this uncertain time, the Lannister name relied on a single secret: that the great Tywin, the fearsome lord of Casterly Rock, was more vulnerable than he had ever been. Whether that secret could be maintained across the sprawl of King's Landing and the cunning eyes of the royal court would soon be tested. Tyrion, the imp, the despised son, rode forth to play his part in this high-stakes masquerade. Tyrion's nights in King's Landing became a blur of worry and wine. The city itself seemed to shift underfoot, every street and alley thrumming with the news that war had ignited. The north was moving, so said the whispers that came from travelers who slipped past the Neck and into the Crownlands with tales of Stark banner men gathering in staggering numbers. The Riverlords, outraged by Ned Stark's execution, began harassing Lannister outriders and besieging the Golden Tooth. Jaime Lannister was reportedly skirmishing with Tully forces near Riverrun, desperate to carve a path or provoke the Riverlords into a rash move. All the while, the new King Joffrey reveled in his power, adopting an imperious air that made even veteran knights roll their eyes in private. Cersei tried to moderate him, but the Boy King's cruelty was too often encouraged by sycophants at court who saw advantage in pleasing him. Tyrion wrote frantically to Kevan Lannister, urging him to coordinate troops in the west, to support Jaime, and, above all, to keep Tywin's condition a closely guarded secret. He couched his words as though they were instructions from Tywin himself, hoping Kevan would read between the lines. House Lannister needed a firm hand, and if Tywin could not provide it, Kevan might have to stand in his stead. Yet Kevan's own replies were disconcerting. Tywin had rallied for a day or two, then relapsed. He drifted in and out of a fevered haze, able to speak only in brief intervals. Those intervals were enough for him to demand certain actions, fortifying the Westerland's borders, calling banners from smaller houses like Marbrand and Craighall, but not nearly enough to guide the grand strategy required by this massive conflict. Kevan did his best, but he was no Tywin. With Jaime in the field and Tyrion pinned at court, the Lannister leadership was fragmented. Matters only grew more dire when word came that Robb Stark, Eddard's eldest son, had raised the banners of the north and swept southward, forging an alliance of wolves and outraged lords. New rumors circulated daily that the Boy Lord of Winterfell had outmaneuvered Tywin's men near the Twins, that he'd bested Jaime in a cunning ambush, that the Riverlands were rallying around him. Some of those tales proved exaggerated, but not all. One day, news reached King's Landing that Jaime Lannister had been captured in battle outside Riverrun. A hush fell over the court when that raven arrived. The queen heard it first, turning pale in the presence of the council. Tyrion found her pacing frantically in her chambers afterward, fury and alarm in her eyes. "They've taken Jaime," she muttered, knuckles white. "If they think to trade him for Sansa Stark, but that boy can't truly imagine we'll surrender." "We might need to parley," Tyrion said carefully. "If they start lopping off the Kingslayer's fingers, we lose one of our best assets." Cersei's laugh was brittle. "Our best asset was father. Jaime led the armies in the field, but even he can't match father's brilliance for strategy." A muscle ticked in her jaw. "Tell me you have heard from father." The last letter said he was awake for an hour, demanded men to reinforce Harrenhal. Then nothing. Tyrion forced a level tone. "I fear Kevin's letters indicate no improvement. The Maester claims father's body is fighting the fever, but it's gone on so long." He trailed off, unwilling to give voice to the worst possibility. If Tywin died now, with Jaime a captive and war raging, House Lannister might fracture like a brittle sword. Cersei pressed a hand to her temple. "The boy king of the north is calling himself the king in the north, if the rumors are true. I will not have that pup recognized as anything but a rebel. Joffrey must appear strong, Tyrion. We must answer in kind." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "You mean further shows of force? More executions?" She turned to him, eyes bright with anger. "Yes, if we do nothing, the realm will see us as weak. Already I can smell fear in these halls. The Tyrells watch from the sidelines, waiting to see who falters. The Baratheons, Stannis and Renly, are making their own claims. We must be ruthless." "I don't disagree that we must show strength," Tyrion replied, "but slaughtering prisoners or small folk will only drive more people into the arms of our enemies. Ned Stark's execution did us no favors." A flicker of regret crossed Cersei's face, but it vanished quickly. "That was Joffrey's doing, and we cannot turn back time." "Then we must think more carefully about our next moves," Tyrion said. "We should negotiate with the River Lords, or at least sow divisions among them. Some might be swayed to our side if we promise them lands or wealth once the rebellion is quashed." Cersei nodded slowly, trying to calm herself. "Do what you must. I'm busy enough keeping Joffrey reined in." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I know father sent you to handle this, but now, it's bigger than we imagined." He exhaled, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. "Indeed it is." He knew that forging alliances or sowing discord was difficult without Tywin's personal presence and fearsome reputation. Tyrion had cunning, yes, but less authority. He would have to rely on illusions, forging more letters in Tywin's name, sending out statements that the Lannister patriarch commanded unwavering loyalty. If Tywin's condition truly plummeted, though, and word spread, that illusion would shatter. Amid these mounting crises, Tyrion found an unexpected source of counsel in Kevin's letters. One particular raven carried a single sheet covered in Tywin's own scrawl, shaky, uncertain, but unmistakably his phrasing. It read, "Gather all strength in the Riverlands. Harrenhal is key. Do not let the boy outmaneuver us. Seal an alliance if needed. Show no weakness." The lines were terse, but they signified that Tywin had at least rallied enough to dictate something. Tyrion clung to that faint hope. He immediately relayed the instructions to Cersei. "Father is awake, at least momentarily," he said. "He wants Harrenhal." She gave a mirthless laugh. "That cursed ruin? Why?" "Because it's strategically placed to dominate the Riverlands. Father knows controlling it would cut off supply lines and hamper any northern advance. If we can hold Harrenhal, we make it difficult for Robb Stark to move deeper south." Tyrion rubbed his chin. He also mentions sealing an alliance, perhaps the Tyrells or some other house. "Littlefinger has mentioned forging ties with the Tyrells," Cersei noted. "Renly Baratheon fled the city and is rumored to be courting their support as well. If we could win them over first." Tyrion considered the possibilities. Mace Tyrell was arrogant and easily flattered. Ser Loras Tyrell had visited Casterly Rock recently and been rebuffed by Tywin's false show of anger. That might complicate negotiations. But the Tyrells wanted status and power. If House Lannister could dangle an appealing marriage or a share of plundered lands, they might sway them before Renly did. "It's worth attempting," Tyrion allowed, "though we must handle them delicately. If they catch even a hint that father's incapacitated, they'll extort us for half the realm." Cersei's expression darkened. "Then we maintain the charade. You can draft letters in father's name offering a marriage alliance. Perhaps Myrcella betrothed to young Loras or something of that nature. Let the Tyrells see opportunity. Loras is a Kingsguard now," Tyrion reminded her. "But there's always the possibility of him being released from that vow if the king commands it. Alternatively, there's Tommen. A betrothal to Margaery Tyrell might be more suitable." "Yes, Margaery," Cersei mused. "She's of marriageable age, I believe, and Tommen's younger. That might lock the Tyrells to our side long-term." She gave Tyrion a keen look. "Begin those overtures, then. Make them think father is personally authorizing it." So it fell to Tyrion to craft another letter, forging Tywin's spidery signature with the utmost care. He made certain to adopt Tywin's brusque tone, praising House Tyrell's contributions, insulting them subtly for their tardiness, then offering the sweetener of a royal betrothal. He made sure to mention that House Lannister remained committed to the alliance in full. When he sealed it with Tywin's signet ring, sent earlier to King's Landing along with other official paraphernalia, he felt a pang. He wondered if his father would ever truly sign such a letter again, or if this was to be the new normal, forging decisions in Tywin's name while the old lion hovered at death's threshold. In the meantime, the war escalated. Robb Stark secured victory after victory in the Riverlands, earning the moniker the Young Wolf from those who witnessed his clever tactics. He slipped past Lannister outriders, ambushed supply lines, and captured strategic forts. Rumors abounded that a giant wolf walked at his side, sowing terror in the hearts of men. Tyrion was skeptical, but he knew how legends could inspire. Jaime was still a prisoner, locked in a Riverrun cell or carted around as a trophy. Accounts varied. That left only Kevin's forces to try and contain the threat, but they lacked the strategic brilliance that Tywin would have brought to bear. Worse, messages from the west came less frequently and offered little solace. One letter, penned by Kevin, revealed that Tywin's fever had suddenly spiked again. He was barely conscious, thrashing and calling out names. Sometimes he demanded to see Joanna, his long-dead wife. Other times he barked orders to phantom soldiers, reliving old battles. Maester Crelin could only apply cooling compresses and herbal poultices, hoping to break the fever. Days passed without improvement. Some of the lesser Westerland lords were growing restless, worried that the lion had lost his roar. Kevin tried to quell their fears, but it was an uphill battle. Tyrion lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling of his modest bedchamber in Maegor's Holdfast. Bronn snored quietly in the adjoining room while a single candle guttered on the bedside table. The burden of decisions and illusions pressed on him like a physical weight. If Tywin died, House Lannister's aura of invincibility would be shattered overnight. Jaime was out of reach. Cersei was cunning, yes, but impulsive. Joffrey was a disaster of arrogance. Tyrion would be left trying to hold together a realm that despised them. He closed his eyes, remembering his father's stern face and unyielding judgments. He'd spent a lifetime craving Tywin's approval, or at least a glimmer of respect. Now he needed more than approval, he needed Tywin's presence, his iron will. Without it, the carefully built empire of gold might collapse. And so Tyrion prayed to gods he barely believed in, let him live a little longer, just long enough to see us through. Sleep took him eventually, restless and haunted. By dawn, a new puzzle awaited him, a raven from the Reach. Mace Tyrell responded favorably to the prospect of a betrothal between Tommen and Margaery, provided King Joffrey approved and provided House Tyrell was given certain assurances, namely, that the Lannisters would reward them with expanded lands along the Reach's border as well as positions of influence at court. The letter reeked of opportunism, but that was to be expected. Tyrion brought it straight to Cersei. She frowned over the parchment, then snorted. "They want half the spoils of the Riverlands if we subdue the Tullys and the Starks?" She tapped a pointed fingernail against the text. "Greedy flowers." "It's their way," Tyrion said. "We need their strength if the realm fractures further, especially if Stannis or Renly tries to claim the throne in earnest." He paused. "Joffrey might not appreciate us offering Tommen's future bride without his input, but he's a child king. We can manage him." Cersei scoffed. "We can try, but let's see if we can negotiate the Tyrells down on some demands." Draft another letter in father's voice, perhaps promising them something less extravagant. Mention that defiance will be unwise. He nodded, preparing for another round of carefully forged correspondence. War raged on, but maybe, just maybe, they could secure the Tyrell alliance in time to keep the wolves at bay. While these negotiations churned, the situation with the captive Jaime remained precarious. Robb Stark had Jaime under guard somewhere in the Riverlands. Scouts reported that Robb was moving again, slipping across the Red Fork with an army. Tyrion found himself in the uneasy position of hoping the Boy King in the north would not break Jaime's neck just to prove a point. Cersei insisted that Joffrey threaten Sansa Stark, who was still in King's Landing, as a deterrent. Indeed, Joffrey began tormenting her, forcing her to gaze upon her father's spiked head, or humiliating her in court. Tyrion tried to intervene, but each time, Joffrey laughed in his face. The cruelty only made Sansa's pleas for mercy more pitiful. "Stop tormenting the girl," Tyrion told the Boy King privately once, with a calm he barely felt. "It does us no good to humiliate a hostage. We want her family to believe she's safe. That way, they'll bargain more willingly for your uncle's release." Joffrey sneered, perched on the Iron Throne as though it were his personal seat. "I am the king. I'll do as I like. The Starks are traitors, and I'll treat them as such. If you don't like it, imp, you can go back to your father's rock." Tyrion's jaw clenched. "I speak out of loyalty, your grace." "Then be loyal and hold your tongue," Joffrey snapped. "Now be gone, before I decide to show you the same mercy as I did her father." With that, the boy gestured for the Kingsguard to escort Tyrion out. Tyrion's stomach twisted with hatred for the little monster. Robert Baratheon might have been a drunken oaf, but he had possessed some shred of camaraderie. Joffrey had naught but cruelty in him, and the crown's power only magnified that cruelty. Tyrion was left to brood that day, writing letters and conferring with Cersei about the Tyrell negotiations, while the city groaned under the weight of new taxes to fund the war effort. Food prices soared, and murmurs of discontent spread in the winding alleys of Flea Bottom. That night, a rider arrived with urgent news from the west. Kevan Lannister's seal glimmered on the wax. Tyrion broke it open, scanning the lines by candlelight. Kevan reported that Tywin's fever had worsened to the point that Maester Crelin feared the Lord of Casterly Rock would not see the next moon's turn. Desperation filled the letter. Kevan wrote that he was doing all he could to hold the lords of the Westerlands together, but their confidence wavered as rumors swirled. Kevan ended with a stark plea: "Return if you can, or send someone we can trust to maintain order. Father's life hangs by a thread, and the men are beginning to question if the lion is dead already." Tyrion's hand shook so badly that he nearly dropped the parchment. He read it twice more as though willing the words to change. They did not. Tywin was dying. If that happened, the illusions would crumble in earnest. No more forging letters in his name. Once the lords realized Tywin was gone, they might splinter from the Lannister cause. Rival claimants, old grudges, and opportunistic bannermen would come out of the woodwork. At a time when the Starks were on the offensive and the Tyrells only half-wooed, House Lannister could ill afford a crisis in the west. Steeling himself, Tyrion hurried to Cersei's chambers with the letter in hand. She was seated at a table covered in half-written parchments, a nearly empty goblet of wine by her elbow. When she saw Tyrion's face, her own features darkened. "What?" she demanded. He held out the parchment. She read it in silence, and for a moment Tyrion glimpsed something raw in her eyes. Then she set the letter down and exhaled sharply. "The old man might die," she said in a near whisper. "Not now." "Not," she stopped, pressing the heel of her hand to her brow. "He cannot." "I know," Tyrion murmured. "But if Kevin's words are true, we should prepare." She stared at him. "Prepare? For the death of Tywin Lannister? Don't speak such madness." "Better to face it than hide," Tyrion said, more gently than usual. "We must have a plan. If father goes, we'll have to declare some new leadership in the west, either Kevan is regent or perhaps reaffirm our power from King's Landing. We cannot let the lesser lords think the seat is vacant." Cersei closed her eyes briefly. "Jaime is the heir to Casterly Rock, but Jaime's in chains. We can't enthrone a prisoner. And you can't leave King's Landing now. We need you here." "Exactly," Tyrion replied. "We'll have to rely on Kevan. But he isn't the man father was. The lords might challenge him." He paused. Unless we can publicly claim that father still lives, strong as ever, until such time as we can secure the West by force. The lies will grow more difficult if he actually. Don't say it, Cersei snapped, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I won't let him die. I refuse. Let me write to Maester Craylan personally. She grabbed a fresh parchment, her quill trembling as she tried to form words. I'll threaten him with dire punishments if he fails. He'll find a cure. Tyrion rubbed his brow, torn between sympathy and exasperation. Sometimes there is no cure, Cersei. Even the mighty must yield to the stranger eventually. She bit her lip until Tyrion feared it might bleed, then resumed scribbling. He was supposed to live to see my Joffrey ascend as a glorious king. He was supposed to guide us through this war. If he dies now, in the midst of everything, her throat constricted and she trailed off. Tyrion moved closer, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. She flinched but did not pull away. We have to continue. Father would expect us to hold the West, defeat the Starks, and see Joffrey on the throne unchallenged. For better or worse, that's our path. Her jaw tightened. Then we'll do it. War or no war, Tywin Lannister's name must remain enough to cow our enemies. We let no one suspect he's on his deathbed. None but Kevin, the Maester, and those we already trust. Agreed, Tyrion said. But if he does pass, we'll have to plan for the funeral. Sooner or later, the truth will out. Cersei gave a miserable laugh. A fine funeral that would be, the realm in flames, half our men fighting the wolves, the other half deserting if they think the Rock is leaderless. She wiped angrily at her eyes. No, he cannot die. That's final. Tyrion said nothing. He let her cling to that final shred of denial, for he had nothing comforting to offer. Instead, he returned to his rooms, heart pounding with dread. He stared at the map of Westeros spread across his table with figurines representing troop placements. Tywin's figure, a golden lion, stood near Casterly Rock, an outdated symbol of a presence that was now only half alive. Tyrion took the figurine and placed it at Harrenhal as Tywin had once planned. But the figure felt hollow in his hand. The next day brought further tumult. News arrived that Renly Baratheon had declared himself king in Highgarden with the Tyrells at his back. Apparently Mace Tyrell had chosen to hedge his bets by aligning with Renly in the short term, though he still toyed with Lannister offers. The betrothal negotiations for Tommen and Margaery were thus thrown into confusion. Tyrion cursed under his breath as he read the contradictory letters from the Tyrells, one proclaiming Renly as the rightful king, another politely continuing to negotiate with Lord Tywin about the future marriage, hoping to keep their options open. In King's Landing, the tension among the small folk exploded when bread shortages struck. Angry crowds gathered, demanding the boy king feed them. Joffrey's response was to have his guards beat or kill several peasants, which sparked riots in the streets. Tyrion witnessed from a balcony how the City Watch tried to contain the chaos, only to be overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of starving and furious commoners. Stones were thrown, curses hurled. When the crowd caught sight of King Joffrey riding past in a litter, they erupted in violence, nearly tearing the litter apart. Ser Marentrand of the King's Guard barely rescued Joffrey from being dragged into the mob. Several women from the court were dismounted and brutalized. The High Septon was literally torn limb from limb. Tyrion arrived at the gates just in time to see the aftermath: battered gold cloaks, smashed wagons, bodies strewn about. He found Joffrey shrieking commands for more violence, insisting that the Watch burn the entire neighborhood in retaliation. Tyrion, incensed, slapped Joffrey hard across the face, an act that stunned the onlookers. "How dare you?" Joffrey spat, eyes wild. "I am your king. And a bloody stupid king at that." Tyrion shouted back. "Do you want the entire city to rise against us? Use your head, boy. If you keep slaughtering small folk, soon we'll have no city at all." Joffrey's hand went to the hilt of his sword, fury contorting his features, but the presence of many stunned onlookers, knights of the King's Guard, gold cloaks, and a few members of the small council held him back. Cersei rushed forward, eyes frantic, ordering Joffrey to stand down. She glowered at Tyrion, but even she could not deny that the riots had to be contained with more nuance than blind butchery. That night, the city was placed under strict curfew. Men were posted at every gate. Tyrion roamed the corridors of the Red Keep, feeling the city's anger simmering just beyond the castle walls. If Tywin had been healthy, he might have orchestrated a solution, imported food from the Reach, forced local lords to open their granaries, or devised some cunning scapegoat. Now, with Tywin near death, House Lannister struggled to manage the crisis. The weeks dragged on in bloody confusion. Robb Stark's northern host scored a decisive victory at the Whispering Wood, capturing more Lannister bannermen and solidifying control of the Riverlands. Jaime remained a prisoner, rumored to be locked in a Riverrun tower. Renly Baratheon marched with the Tyrells toward Storm's End, intending to consolidate his seat of power. Stannis Baratheon was rumored to be building ships at Dragonstone, preparing to stake his own claim. King's Landing seethed with unrest, half-starved and furious at the Lannisters for failing to keep them safe. King Joffrey's rule grew more despotic, and Cersei's attempts to rein him in produced only modest success. All the while, Tyrion orchestrated letter after letter in Tywin's name, commanding loyalty in the West, urging Harrenhal to stand firm, sending half-hearted negotiations to any house that might be swayed. It was a monumental effort of misdirection, and the cracks were beginning to show. Some lords wrote back demanding a personal audience with Lord Tywin. Others complained that they'd sent ravens to Casterly Rock and received inconsistent replies. Tyrion scrambled to keep each deception consistent, forging new scrolls with different scripts when needed, explaining that Tywin had little time for personal entreaties. But a rumor spread that Tywin was indeed ill. When confronted with it, Tyrion would sneer and claim his father was fit and well, but the rumor persisted. Misinformation had a life of its own. One night, a hush fell over the Red Keep as a raven arrived from Kevan Lannister. The tone was grim and formal, the words etched in Tyrion's mind as he read them. Lord Tywin's fever has broken at last. By the grace of the Seven, he has awakened. He is weak, but the Maester declares the worst has passed. He asks for updates on the war. He demands to know how the boy in King's Landing has ruined the realm. Prepare for his return. Tyrion's heart soared. He rushed to Cersei's chambers, ignoring the guards, and burst in unannounced. She whirled, eyes flashing, until she saw the excitement on his face. Wordlessly, he handed her Kevan's letter. She scanned it, her lips parting in relief. "He's alive," she whispered. "Awake." "It appears so," Tyrion said, barely containing his own rush of emotion. "The fever has broken. If he truly recovers." Her hands trembled. "Then we might yet salvage this. We can bring him here. Let him take charge of the armies. Quell the rebellion. Tywin Lannister will restore order." Tyrion nodded, though he felt a stab of caution. Tywin would be a frail shadow of himself at first, too weak to ride at the head of an army. But even an ailing Tywin was formidable. His presence alone could rally the Westerlands. "We must send word at once. Inquire if he's strong enough to travel safely or if we should meet him at Harrenhal. Father once wrote that Harrenhal was key to controlling the Riverlands. Maybe he'll ride there first to take command." Cersei wasted no time drafting a reply, lavishing praise on the gods for sparing Tywin and begging him to come east as soon as he was able. Tyrion wrote a more measured dispatch, summarizing the dire situation in the Crownlands, the precarious alliances, and the open war with the North. He ended it with a personal note. "My Lord Father, we have done all in our power to hold your seat until your return. The realm quakes, and only your guiding hand can restore calm." Within days, ravens flew back and forth with updates. Tywin, though physically weak, had regained clarity of mind. His instructions grew sharper, more reminiscent of the man Tyrion knew. Fortify the Gold Road against possible infiltration, secure certain bridges in the Riverlands, and keep pressing the Tyrell marriage alliance. Tywin's demands were immediate, his will unstoppable. Kevan wrote that Tywin's frustration at his own convalescence was palpable. He chafed at being confined to bed, forced to build up strength one faltering step at a time. His pride kept him pushing forward, though. He refused to let the realm see him as an invalid. Tyrion felt relief mingle with a strange sense of dread. When Tywin learned the full extent of Joffrey's misrule, the riot, the capture of Jaime, and the alliances slipping away, he would be furious. Tyrion braced himself for the old lion's wrath, along with the realization that the illusions they'd spun might not always match the decisions Tywin would have made himself. But that was a matter for another day. For now, the knowledge that Tywin might truly return to lead the Lannisters in war was a lifeline they desperately needed. Even the rumor mills in King's Landing began to shift tone, as ravens from the west boasted that Lord Tywin is recovering, stronger than ever, preparing to ride out and smash the rebels. Tyrion encouraged these tales, seeing how the mere mention of Tywin's name could stiffen the spines of wavering courtiers. For a moment, the morale of Lannister loyal knights rose. The gold cloaks seemed more confident patrolling the streets. Joffrey sneered that he needed no help, but Cersei breathed a sigh of relief. Still, war raged unabated outside the city walls. Robb Stark's forces continued to harass Lannister bannermen. Stannis and Renly hovered on the cusp of confrontation, each calling himself the rightful king. The small folk starved, and the city's mood remained a powder keg. At last, the day came when Tyrion received the message he had been waiting for. Tywin was on the move. Kevan's letter stated that the Lord of Casterly Rock, though not fully recovered, had insisted on traveling with a select guard. He intended to reach Harrenhal, rally any loyal forces in the region, and then determine his next steps, be it marching on the Riverlands or pressing toward King's Landing. Tyrion read the letter aloud to Cersei in her solar, voice trembling with both excitement and anxiety. "So father will be at Harrenhal soon," Cersei breathed. "He'll have the might of the Westerlands behind him. Then we can coordinate a real offensive against the Starks. We can force the Tyrells to pick a side, ours or face his wrath." Tyrion nodded. "That's the hope, but he'll expect us to have managed things better here. Joffrey's impulses may spark conflict." Cersei's face hardened. "I'll keep Joffrey in line until father arrives. Once he does, I'll let him speak to the boy." She gave Tyrion a wry look. "The last time I remember father truly angry was after some foolishness Jaime and I orchestrated in our youth. Tywin's punishments are memorable." A ripple of unease passed through Tyrion. He too knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of Tywin's displeasure. But the realm needed the old lion's discipline more than ever. Jaime's capture, the war in the north, the shifting alliances, none of it would be resolved without a powerful anchor. For better or worse, Tywin Lannister, newly risen from his sickbed, would be that anchor. Weeks crawled by, but at last the word came that Tywin had taken Harrenhal, installing himself in the vast, haunted castle. Kevan wrote that the fortress's previous garrison had scattered upon hearing of Tywin's approach, and the local lords were once more quaking at the old lion's roar. Tyrion noted that while Tywin had not physically led the charge, he was still too weak for rigorous campaigning. His name alone caused half the defenders to flee. Once inside Harrenhal, Tywin set about reorganizing the forces. He demanded fresh supplies from the west, summoned bannermen from Craycall, Banefort, and Lydon, and established a base to strike at the Northmen in the Riverlands. The letters dripped with Tywin's scathing commentary about the failures that had led to Jaime's capture, as well as condemnation of Joffrey's idiocy. Cersei accepted these critiques with a mix of relief and exasperation. She showed Tyrion one of Tywin's letters in which he commanded the immediate mobilization of any Crownlands knights still loyal to the throne. "I will not suffer that boy to cost us this war," he wrote in his familiar, forceful style. "Restrain him if you must. Victory must be achieved swiftly lest the other kings see us as weak." Tyrion almost laughed aloud at the suggestion that Joffrey might be restrained easily, but he took heart in Tywin's renewed sense of purpose. The old lion was not at his peak, but he was awake, aware, and more determined than ever to crush the rebellion. Their illusions had bought them time, just enough time for Tywin to recover from his deathly illness. Now, as war flared across Westeros, House Lannister clung to the edge of a knife, with Tywin's return the only force that might tip the balance back in their favor. Over the next few weeks, the city reeled from fresh news of battle. Robb Stark shattered a smaller Lannister host near Oxcross, proving that the boy in the north was no mere pup. Tywin responded by mustering a larger army at Harrenhal, forcing the river lords to spread themselves thin. While the Starks raced about winning skirmishes, Tywin consolidated. He still needed time to regain his full strength, so Kevan handled much of the day-to-day, but Tywin's mind sharpened each passing day. With the lines of command clarified, Lannister forces gained momentum, recapturing some lost outposts. Finally, in a turn of events that felt almost miraculous to Tyrion, Tywin announced he would ride from Harrenhal to King's Landing, bringing reinforcements. Kevan's message relayed that Tywin had demanded the largest warhorse available, a black destrier, which he insisted on mounting despite the maester's protests. He moved slowly, but his presence on the march galvanized the men. Lords who once questioned his health now quailed before his imperious glare. In King's Landing, the anticipation was electric. Courtiers whispered that Tywin Lannister was coming to put the realm to rights. They remembered the days of Robert's rebellion when Tywin had sacked the city. Fear mingled with a strange hope. Cersei made frantic preparations. She ordered the Red Keep cleaned and decorated, commanded the gold cloaks to present arms in perfect formation, and demanded that King Joffrey show proper respect when his grandfather arrived. Joffrey sniffed and said he'd do as he pleased, but in truth the boy was intimidated by Tywin's looming presence. When at last the day came and the gates of the city swung wide, Tyrion joined Cersei at the walls to greet Lord Tywin. A column of Lannister knights, banners snapping in the breeze, rode in behind the old lion's black destrier. Tywin cut an imposing figure despite his pallor. He wore polished armor chased with gold, though Tyrion could see how his shoulders hunched slightly as if still wrestling with inner weakness. Yet Tywin's eyes blazed with the cold intensity that had built the Lannister name into legend. The assembled knights and onlookers fell silent, parted ranks, and bowed as Tywin rode through. He dismounted near the gatehouse, handing his reins to a squire. For a moment he stood motionless, breathing heavily. Then, with Kevin and a few others offering discreet support if needed, he straightened and walked forward. Cersei stepped forth, dipping into a courtesy that was more formal than familial. Tyrion bowed. Even Joffrey, who emerged from the Red Keep late and flanked by Kingsguard, managed a hasty inclination of the head. "My lord father," Cersei said, voice trembling only slightly, "we welcome you to King's Landing." Tywin surveyed them, his gaze lingering on each face. At length he spoke, his tone softer than the roar men expected, but no less commanding for that softness. "So I see. The city stands still, though in chaos. Much has transpired in my absence." Cersei's lips tightened in fleeting guilt. "We have done what we could." Tywin's cool gaze flicked to Joffrey, who looked away as if stung. Then he turned to Tyrion. "And you, Tyrion, forging letters in my name, quite the bold undertaking." Tyrion felt his cheeks burn. "We acted only to preserve your legacy, father. There was no other choice, with you ill." A faint sneer curved Tywin's mouth. He let the silence stretch, as if deciding whether to rebuke Tyrion in front of the entire welcoming party. Then, to Tyrion's surprise, he gave a curt nod. "I have read your forgeries. Some impressed me with their accuracy. Others less so. But we shall discuss that in private." Cersei ventured a half-smile. "Father, you must be weary from the journey. The entire court awaits your command. Shall we proceed to the throne room?" Tywin cast a glance at the Red Keep rising behind them. "Yes, I will see how matters stand." He took a step, faltered slightly, then caught himself. Kevin offered an arm, which Tywin brushed aside. "I am not an invalid," he rasped, the old fury igniting in his eyes. "Lead on." And so they walked, a slow procession through the gates and into the keep, with onlookers gawking at the legendary figure who had been rumored dead. Rumors died swiftly in the face of living proof. Tywin Lannister, the Lion of the West, had indeed risen from his sickbed to stride once more across the realm's grand stage. Guards snapped to attention, servants bowed low, and whispering courtiers scurried to keep pace. Tyrion walked behind his father, heart pounding with a mixture of relief, fear, and anticipation of the reckoning to come. In the throne room, Joffrey perched on the Iron Throne, though he shifted nervously under Tywin's appraising glare. The old lion came to a halt at the foot of the dais, gazing up at the twisted swords. Silence hung thick as the entire court waited to see how this would unfold. Finally, Joffrey blurted, "Welcome, Lord Grandfather. You have arrived just in time to see how I deal with traitors." Tywin's expression remained neutral. "So I am told." He glanced sideways at Cersei, who stood near her son. "Your Grace, I have come to offer counsel and to ensure our family's success in this war. Perhaps we might speak in private about your plans." Joffrey bristled at the suggestion, but a stern look from Cersei kept him from spouting something foolish. "Very well," he said, trying to sound magnanimous. "I shall grant you an audience. But remember, I am the king." Tywin's eyes flickered with disdain, but he bowed his head slightly. "Of course, Your Grace." Tyrion watched the exchange with no small satisfaction. Even in a weakened state, Tywin commanded more respect than Joffrey. The gathered knights and courtiers also seemed to sense it. The hush was broken only when Tywin gestured for Kevin, Tyrion, and a handful of advisors to accompany him while the rest were dismissed. Guards ushered the curious onlookers out. Soon, only a small group remained in the vast hall: Tywin, Kevin, Cersei, Joffrey, Tyrion, and a few Kingsguard. Tywin did not wait for Joffrey to speak. He turned to Kevin. "Is the city secure?" Kevin cleared his throat. "Tensions remain high, my lord, but we hold the gates." "The king's men." Tywin cut him off, focusing on Joffrey. "And the riots? I hear the small folk starve, that chaos reigns in the streets. Are these rumors false?" Joffrey scowled. "They are ungrateful wretches, deserving of no pity." Cersei hastened to intervene. "We had trouble containing them, but we have since enforced a curfew. The situation is under control, father." Tywin's mouth twitched in disapproval. "Controlled how exactly?" "By beating and killing them in the streets." No one answered. The silence spoke volumes. Tywin turned to Tyrion. "And you? In your letters, you claim to have negotiated with the Tyrells. Where stands that matter now?" Tyrion cleared his throat. "They're playing both sides, father. They have allied with Renly Baratheon in name, but continue to respond to our overtures. If we can promise them enough, perhaps a betrothal for Tommen, they might yet join us. They have not fully committed to Renly's cause. Then we shall lure them away from Renly for good. If that means bribes or alliances, so be it." Tywin's voice grew harsher with each word, but there was a feverish gleam in his eye that reminded Tyrion of the man Tywin had been before the illness. A mind like a steel trap, snapping tight around any weakness. Joffrey lifted his chin. "I don't see why we need them. I can crush Starks, Baratheons, and Tyrells alike." Tywin's gaze snapped to the Boy King. "You might find the realm is not so easily bent to your whims, your grace." The words were polite, but the tone was ice. Joffrey flushed, but said nothing. Cersei stepped in once more, anxious to maintain calm. "Father, perhaps we should retire to a smaller council chamber. You are weary, I'm sure." Tywin's jaw tightened. "I am weary of incompetent governance, not of travel. But yes, let us discuss war plans in private. I would see how many men remain loyal, how many are in open rebellion. We will restore order." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the hall. Failure is not an option. With that, the newly returned lion led them from the throne room, ignoring the discomfort in his stiff limbs. Tyrion trailed behind, heart pounding with a chaotic blend of fear and relief. Tywin had come back from the brink of death, and House Lannister was no longer rudderless. But that also meant the illusions and half-measures Tyrion had employed would be scrutinized. Tywin would demand total compliance, total competence. If Joffrey or Cersei defied him, the fallout could be catastrophic. If Kevin failed to muster the men, or if the West faltered, Tywin's rage would be legendary. Yet, for the first time in many months, Tyrion felt the faintest spark of optimism. In the face of war and rebellion, Tywin's leadership offered a chance, perhaps the only chance, to regain the initiative and secure the Iron Throne for House Lannister. The old lion's shadow loomed large once more, casting a protective darkness over Casterly Rock and King's Landing alike. The War of the Five Kings still raged, but with Tywin returned to the stage, the outcome was far less certain for House Stark or any other pretender. Time would tell whether Tywin's weakened body could match his indomitable will. But for now, the lion had awakened, and Westeros would tremble at his roar. For Cersei, for Tyrion, for Jaime in his prison cell, for young Joffrey perched precariously on the Iron Throne, this was the final bulwark against utter chaos. If Tywin faltered again, House Lannister might still break under the strain. But if he prevailed, even death and fever could not undo the legacy of Tywin Lannister, and the realm would once more bow to the unyielding power of the West, forged anew in the fires of war.